Hey, what is up, everybody? I am here today with Alex from Podcast Now. Hey, Alex, thank you for being here. We really appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me. I'm very, very excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here, dude. I mean, it's a long time coming. We're doing another Silent Hill video, which is always a really fun thing. This one's going on my channel. I think a lot of people know I'm a huge fan of this franchise, and we wanted to take a look at 5 things that a new game in the Silent Hill series would have to do or have to include to be a great game. And there has been a lot of rumors and speculation and reports about Sony actually rebooting this franchise, something that you've covered a lot on your channel as well, that I think you could probably fill people in even better than I can.
Right, yeah, so seemingly, and it's been this way for a while, and we haven't gotten it yet, but it seems like Sony has basically worked out a contract with Konami to get the rights to do Silent Hill. Konami would take a big, big piece of the pie. Sony would be handling it, right? And rumor is Team Silent, right, the makers of some of the better Silent Hill games, that they have gotten some of them back. So it's looking good. I've been very overconfident on it, even to the point of guaranteeing that it would be at certain shows, but it hasn't been there. There's, I would say, enough rumors to suggest it's real. And so I think, credit to you and even this video, what we'll talk about. These are things I think are very realistic and are big questions as soon as we were to see that first trailer. These are probably the things we'd be asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I'm really excited for there to hopefully be a new entry in this franchise, because it's just been dead forever other than being a pachinko machine decoration. So these are 5 things that this game series needs to do to come back and create a great title. Number 5. The first one is definitely, it either needs to be a total reboot, or it needs to only be connected to Team Silent titles. Now, I think this depends on how much you want to include the original mythology of the series, if you want to assume that people played them, which is, I think, a hard thing to assume, because Silent Hill 1, readily accessible. It's on PS3. You can play it either with a PlayStation 1 disc right in your PS3, or you can download a digital copy. That one's easy to get for everybody. But when you get into Silent Hill 2 and 3, they're actually a lot more difficult to play. There is a worse version of them on PS3 through the HD remaster, the HD collection, which just doesn't really play well and doesn't look good, because they had lost a lot of the original code and stuff. So that one, those 2 are kind of rocky. And 4 is really just on the PS2, finally came to PC now. But this series is so scattershot that I don't know if you'd even want to connect it to those original Team Silent titles. I would love it, but I think most people won't have played them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a thing, and I can't relate to loving it. I mean, you really love it, and you have all this knowledge of it, which is awesome. And I think I can relate to the idea of loving a franchise and hoping they do it major justice, right? So I can totally get behind, truly, anybody that would say, no, you know what, it needs to, if it was a spiritual sequel, or just flat out, it could even be flat out a sequel to those games, and it would be fine. I think that's totally cool, and if you're a massive fan, you have every right to want that or think that. I would say, again, from being on the outside perspective looking in, I do think this is a good situation of a game. Unlike maybe others you could think of, I think this is a good situation where, yeah, it's probably best you just start it. You could still have references, you could still, and even what we'll talk about, right? You can honor it in other ways. You can honor, the past in other ways. But even in the game, like, you could do some nice little nods, you could do Easter eggs, all that kind of stuff. There are ways of making it work. And yeah, not enough people, I feel like more people know of PT as a Silent Hill game than they know of some of these old ones, right? So I think when you have that, it probably is just best to go from the beginning, capture the spirit, do all the other stuff that we'll talk about, and go from there. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, it's definitely something where I think you couldn't miss either way, but you might really alienate a group of people if you try to harken back to games that started on the original PlayStation 1.
Right.
Really just depends. Number 4! I think that moves us into our next point, which is that you cannot just copy Silent Hill 2. One thing I am very tired of from this franchise, basically after Silent Hill 4 on, is that in some way they all are just Silent Hill 2, or they all want to copy the ideas of Silent Hill 2. Now, I like the ideas of Silent Hill 2, of Silent Hill sort of punishing someone for their crimes and stuff like that. That is a key focus of the Silent Hill franchise, but it's not the only focus. You know, the original, especially 1 and 3, there's a lot of stuff going on with the cult. There's a lot of stuff going on with God and the monsters and even the angels, you know, the Seal of Metatron, all this stuff like that, and how it ties together, what the cult wants to usher in paradise, which would technically be basically the apocalypse. There was a lot of religious undertones and stuff there as well with the horror, and those pretty much just get dropped completely. I think that they focused on everybody likes Silent Hill 2 best. Let's just keep remaking that, but worse. We don't want to see that from a new title. I don't think at all. I don't think anyone wants to just see Silent Hill 2 again, unless you're gonna from the ground up remake Silent Hill 2 or remaster it, which is definitely not what they're doing, or we would have heard about that. We don't need another Silent Hill 2.
Right, and I think that's important. You know, I've always been one, whether it's music, whether it's games, whether it's TV, movies, I don't understand the grasping of people, or even like the people that make this stuff, to try to replicate what once did really well in the hopes that they can because ultimately it was special for a reason, and you're never gonna recapture it fully, right? Never. The only thing you can do is keep going and hope that you make something that can be comparable in terms of quality. Oh my God, this is just as good. But obviously they play with all these new ideas or all these new features. But yeah, I think that's important. And this one is, I think, more of a scary, scary as in a horror, right? But it's more of a scary thing when we see the trailer, whenever this would actually happen, if we actually see it, because that would be something where it's okay, do they try to go safe? Could you argue that's safe, right? Where it's well, let's just take all the stuff that's worked, and which again actually points to a couple other points we'll say. But in this one, it's literal. Do you literally steal from Silent Hill 2 and really make that so closely related that you're pretty much doing the same thing? I mean, ultimately, you'd make it an okay game, but I just feel like you'd make one that doesn't have a lot of originality or doesn't have a lot of spirit to it. And those are, when you do a remake, or when you, actually a remake is a good example, a reboot or a remake, even like a Demon Souls thing, you have to have your own kind of take on it as well, while capturing the spirit. Otherwise, it's just like a hollow shell.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think, like you said, we'll get more into that too, but good examples of this as well are the Souls games, Dark Souls 2 and 3. Now, they have problems, for sure, but they really do capture the spirit of the original Dark Souls while moving on in the story and not just being the exact same thing. Crash actually is a good one too. You've been covering Crash Bandicoot a lot on your channel, and Crash 4 came out. It's a very competent sequel. It seems like it really falls in line after Crash 3. The gameplay mechanics are there, but they added new twists and new spins and new things that gave it personality in 2020.
Yep, that's a perfect example. You take what works, but you also have to push it forward. And if there's going to be more, but you imagine you don't get the rights to this to make a one-off game and then you're done, right? So you'd expect there'd be more even after this. So you have to start pushing it into its own new area.
I absolutely agree. That moves us on to our third point, number 3. Which is that this needs to use modern horror techniques. Now, you pointed this out. I completely agree with it. I'm a little worried on this one because, you don't want to just have the exact gameplay from 2000 or 2004 or whatever. But at the same time, I don't want it to be so far different that it's Resident Evil 7 different, where if you play the first one, it's this third-person survival horror game. It's very different. And then if you were to jump from 1 to 7, there's nothing wrong with doing something different, but it's... if you told me that Resident Evil 7 was not a Resident Evil game, I would believe you. That is how different the gameplay is. And there's nothing wrong with that, but as a hardcore fan of the originals, it worries me how far in that direction you might go with Silent Hill, and if it would even feel like Silent Hill. That's the only thing that worries me, but I do agree they need to modernize it.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely something you always have to be, and again, from being like a hardcore fan of anything, that's kind of what you would hope for, right? Is that they, you make some changes here or there, and again, a game like this, a game that is so old, you have to bring it up, I think, to current time. A thing with remakes or remasters or whatever, even recent ones like SpongeBob or Destroy All Humans that came out this summer, both of those were good, but you could just feel literally the gameplay was holding both those big time, was holding them back. And you could still feel like Destroy All Humans, you were in 2005, right? And that's an issue. And so, and you know, this is different because if they were making it from the ground up, they're not literally going to be copying the code that they had back then. But you know, I think there is a kind of a sweet spot where they can use a lot of the techniques, the techniques that worked with the original games in that gameplay, in the actual gameplay. They could use that and just modernize it, bring it up to current standards. And yeah, not stealing from Resident Evil or PT or Amnesia, but using some of those as, I mean, there's a reason why those have kind of reinvigorated the horror franchise, why a lot of games are copying, you know, them and doing their own thing. There's a reason. And so I think if you have to stand out, and I think, and those are actually the next 2 points. I keep leading ourselves into the next points. Like, you do have to stand out, and Silent Hill has a ton of ways of standing out on its own. So borrowing is not the worst thing in the world. And again, ultimately, you can't be playing a 2021, 2022 game that still feels like you're in the early. I mean, that would fail. That would absolutely fail.
Yeah, I think that really moves us into our next point, which, like you said, you have been kind of pushing into point after point here in a good way. I think we kind of have to organically move on. Number 2! Into the next one, which is a focus on story. Now, I have quite a few things under this point, which I will just kind of breeze through here. Gameplay was always fun in Silent Hill, but as you would say, gameplay wasn't king in the original franchise. The point of the gameplay was to make you feel powerless. It was to put you in situations where it was generally more favorable for you to run. There are not a lot of situations in Silent Hill, other than boss fights, where you actively want to seek out and engage enemies. There's very few. Because really enemies are obstacles, and they are there to have symbolism and purpose and to be a challenge, but they're not there like Devil May Cry for you to just charge in, guns blazing or whatever. You need to have the enemies there for symbolism. You need to have these deeper plot points behind the game that, again, are not just Silent Hill 2. You need to embrace the spirit of the original games, and you also need monsters and enemies that really do harken back to the original town and events, or whatever they are in this universe, this timeline, because the whole point of them was really to be symbolic. The nurses in Silent Hill 2, they represent both, there's a ton of things these things represent, and none of them are fully ever fleshed out, but the nurses in a lot of ways represent James's sexuality, and also his conflicted feelings on it, the destruction of the face and identity there on that, and you could just breeze through these games and not notice that, or notice the symbolism of Pyramid Head or any of these. But I think that if you look at it, some of those things are what make this actual art beyond just a game, I think, is just how smart it is. And that's kind of what it comes back to, is if you drop that and it's just a generic horror game, there is no point to slap Silent Hill on this thing.
Exactly. That's a really, I think you summed it up really well. This is Silent Hill. You don't want to make it something it's not. And again, while we said, you should borrow, I'd say, modern horror techniques, you have to be Silent Hill, because ultimately the group that you're always going to have are those Silent Hill fans. And so if you made a game and it wasn't Silent Hill, yeah, maybe it would do, good overall. Maybe people would like it, but you're already disappointed. And I don't think there's in the world of the internet that we're now in, not a good way to start, right? You really have to appeal, I think, firstly to the core, audience, which are the ones that already, know Silent Hill. But obviously you need more than them. Otherwise the game just flat out isn't going to do well. So yeah, I mean, what makes Silent Hill to me? So again, I've told Jay this, I don't think I've played a Silent Hill game from start to finish. Okay. So from the outside looking in, all I can say is, yeah, they've never, from what I know, they've never really been about the gameplay massively. Okay, that's not the main draw. That's not what makes Silent Hill a Silent Hill game. And so I think if you're doing it now, you have to actually stick with that. And you brought up Crash too. That's a good example, because what Crash did is actually all of that. I mean, it appealed to people that have played these Crash games, but it took it, and it felt very organic, that it felt like a Crash game, but it did it in its own way. And these guys, had their own little brush on it. And Silent Hill would have to do the same thing. I mean, it is a Silent Hill game. You have to go off on your own. But the story and the symbolism and the deeper meanings, I think what you said towards the end too, how you could probably play through these games and not catch all those little things. And then if you go back, maybe you learn something each time. I really like that. I really like that with like music, like conceptual albums. So I think a game like Silent Hill is exactly like that. I think it would be, again, a game that would probably work from like a general consumer standpoint, that you're buying this game. Lots of people could buy it. You'll get scared. The story will be deep. It'll be, something that you'll actually connect with. The gameplay will be serviceable, right? At worst, let's say. And then for the hardcore people, there's more to it. And I think right there is kind of what makes the game, and they have to be able to, they can't copy what they've already done, but they have to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and people are still talking about the original 4, at least, Silent Hill games to this day, with the symbolism, what things mean. It's analyzed like literature, and I think that that's kind of what you need to do, like you said, just to cap off your point, is you need to create a game that is a game that works for casual people who aren't that deep into it, but also that people are going to talk about in years. If you bring back Silent Hill, and this is essentially the Silent Hill Homecoming entry where everyone wants to forget it existed, again, there's no point.
Number one. It's number one.
That actually moves us into our final point, and that is that this needs to be really kind of two things, actually. You need to treat this as a standalone, I believe, like the originals. The originals, not that they ever said, hey, the story's done, but they all had a sense of finality to them for the character you were playing as, but they were sometimes referenced back to in later games, whether that's Silent Hill 3 referencing 1, whether that's 4 referencing some events from 2, it doesn't matter. They would eventually reference back small things, but they weren't big enough that they controlled the game. The 2 Silent Hill games that I would say are the most connected are 1 and 3, with Cheryl Mason's story being, super connected to Heather, and Harry obviously being in both games, things like that. But overall, for the most part, there were not really direct sequels or anything where it was like, hey, like Metal Gear Solid is a good example of this. I love that franchise, but if you haven't played Metal Gear Solid 1 or 2 and you jump into at least 4, you're going to be missing some stuff. It didn't feel quite as much like that with Silent Hill. They were able to create standalone titles as an anthology, which also tied into each other. And I guess that's kind of what I want to see from this if they're starting a new franchise.
Right. Yeah, it's tough because you don't bring back a franchise like this. You don't really do anything in modern day without having a plan for the future. Not even because of like making money and knowing you can make a franchise out of it, but especially for games, it's because of the assets and building up this world, the engine, all sorts of different mechanics, and then doing it for one game and then scrapping it and doing it for, like Sucker Punch did that, and they admitted to that for Infamous. When they made Ghost of Tsushima, they had to scrap almost everything they did for Infamous except for a couple things, and that set them back. That's why it took them so long to make it. And so you'll think about that going in the future for Silent Hill. Yeah, obviously you expect, even Sony, if they're putting this much money in, which you would imagine they're putting a lot, to get Silent Hill back, they're not going to do it just for one game. They would want to bring this back as an established franchise and keep that going, make it so that, hey, you want Silent Hill, you can only get it on PlayStation, things like that. So what they have to be careful of is, not like sequel baiting. Leave doors open to leave little references, to even leave big story points, but where it's not obvious, where they can catch you by surprise later down the line. Those are all things, again, I think make Silent Hill also pretty darn special, and I think you got to watch out for when you're bringing it back.
I absolutely agree. So yeah, those are our 5 things that we would want to see in a new title, or that we think Silent Hill would need to do to come back. Alex, thank you so much for being here. I always love recording with you. It's always a pleasure. Alex has actually a couple of channels and other stuff as well. The links to him will be in the description, along with the links to all my stuff. And also I will do a pinned comment. I'm saying this more for myself to even remember to do that. So please check out Alex's channel. He does an awesome job covering all kinds of different games. He is one of my favorite people. Well, no, you know what? You are my favorite person to work with on YouTube in terms of actually doing stuff with and keeping me motivated. So I always love having you here.
Thanks a ton, man. I really appreciate it, and this was a lot of fun. Again, like we normally do for all these videos, these make me more excited that hopefully we're right, or that there's some sort of higher being that we're like willing into existence. So hopefully, hopefully some of these things end up coming true when the game gets announced, which it will. I'm gonna go on. I'm on your channel. I'm saying it for sure. It's gonna happen.
Well, we're gonna hold you to that. No, yeah, check out Alex's channel, and if you're a fan of Silent Hill, he has done a lot of different stuff covering this as well, and is going to continue to do so. So again, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, let me know in the the comments down below. I was gonna say the description. I do that all the time. What you think about this? What you'd want to see in a new game? What are your thoughts on the video? Hey, what do you think about the audio? We tried Discord this time. I think it's a lot clearer. I think. So let me know your thoughts down there. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. That always helps a lot. If you are one of the 62, I believe, % of my viewers who is not yet subscribed, I really hope that today is the day I have earned your subscription to the channel, and that I can continue to entertain you, and we can build a nice community going into the end of the year. See you in the next one. Have a fantastic day, and as always, stay shway.